Greetings, people who really, truly, sincerely like this, the accordion. Today's going to be a very simple review of the dominant 7 chord. I'm going to use a C7 as an example, the C dominant 7. So we're going to review that. This might be helpful for beginners or those who haven't seen my previous videos. I'm the guy who teaches you how to play the Stradella Bass Machine using all 5 fingers of the left hand. I don't think anybody else teaches that, but I've been doing it for quite some time. Okay, so let's take the very simple and basic C dominant 7 chord. It's a C bass and the C7 chord button. Okay. And on your button diagram, so you can see it clearly, you'd have your C bass and your C dominant 7 button. And when you play that C7 chord button with the C bass, you're write it like this if you want to. You would get the tones C, E, and B flat. And the 5th, the G, is missing. Okay? Now, you can get the G if you want to in several different ways. You could play a G bass button with the C dominant 7 chord button. If you want to get that missing 5, G bass button and the C dominant 7 chord button. That would give you the missing 5th. So here's your C dominant 7 regular, then the dominant 7 with the G bass. Now you can also play, all right, the C7 using the G diminished chord button with the C counter bass, or the G diminished chord button with the C bass. Okay, then you'll get all 4 tones of your dominant 7th chord. And here you see the tones. So you can do it like this. You can play the C bass with the ring finger and the G diminished chord button with the thumb. See, I'm pressing on with the edge of my thumb. Now remember, the regular C dominant 7 gives you this. And the 5th is missing. But when you play the C bass with the G diminished chord button with the thumb, you get this. You get all 4 tones that you need. Now, on your diagram, in case you can't see my fingers clearly, I played the C bass button with the G diminished chord button, but you can also use the C counter bass with the G diminished chord button. It goes like this. It's the C counter bass with the pinky and the G diminished chord button with the thumb. See that? If you watch my other videos and you watched and learned how I teach chords, the flow of chords, you'll see how that could come in handy in any given song, okay? So we have the C dominant 7 regular, the C dominant 7 using the G diminished chord button, and then the C counter bass with the G diminished chord button. And then there's also the G bass with the C diminished chord button, so you get your 5th. Okay? So that takes care of that. I think I covered everything on this chart. Now, while we're at it, let's look at yet another way to play the C dominant 7. Okay, we have a B flat bass and a C major chord button. That's real easy. B flat bass, C major chord button. Same thing. Okay, now let's move on to the C9 because it's kind of in the same family, kind of, sort of. Here's your C bass and your G minor chord button. If you play those two, you get your G minor chord button, okay, with your C bass, and that yields these tones. C, G, B flat, D. Now there's no third, there's no E, but I show this because the dominant 7, that's the B flat, that's what we call a dominant or prominent interval. It shows up in this chord, and it's a nice chord, so we might as well learn it. Okay, that's the chart, and here's the actual bass machine. You can substitute that for the regular C dominant 7. But when you play that, what you're actually getting is your C, and here's your 9, okay? C, your root, 5th, 7th, 9th. See, that's very pretty. Now you can play a nice richer sound with the C bass button, C major chord button, and the G minor chord button. And that will give you C, E, G, B flat, and D. Okay, you get a little bit fuller sound. That's your chord chart. And here's your actual buttons. C bass, C major chord button, G minor chord button with those. That's a beautiful sound. That's your C dominant 9, but the third is not missing, okay? Over here, the third was missing. Here, the third is not missing. All right? Now that gives you a nice selection. You can have your C dominant 7 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different positions, okay? And for beginners and people who really care about this, the accordion, I'll show you this. It's if you want to learn something. And this is in my previous videos. I cover all this. The ordinary configuration of reed sets for the accordion, in other words, the basic accordion, go kind of like this. You know, soprano, alto, contralto, tenor, bass. It goes kind of like that. It can vary, though, okay? It can vary, but this is basically the setup. Now, keeping this in mind, when we play our our C dominant 7, okay, on this accordion, this would be the symbol for the bass register. That's this one here, but there's no symbol on here, okay? But this would be the symbol for a register that uses the alto and tenor reed sets. You see? It uses the alto, hence the dot, and the tenor. You'll see that on usually more expensive accordions. You'll see the symbols. So here we're going to play the C dominant 7 button with the C bass, and we will get, all right, out of the alto reed set, we will get a C4, E4, and B flat 4. Out of the alto reed set, we'll get a C4 bass tone, okay? That's your bass button. And then when we hit the bass button, we'll also get from the tenor reed set, a C3. So you see, here's your chord tones, and then we'll get bass tones, okay? Now the 5th, that's the G4, it will be missing. There won't be a 5th in there. But when you use this register on your accordion, you will get these tones, ordinarily. That's on your basic accordion. I don't know what fancy accordions, what they do, but mine's like this. Now when I use this other register here, I get more tones, and hence a fuller sound. But I'm showing you this one here, this one. So you get only these tones. Only these tones here. Your chord button tones and your bass button tones. So that gives you a little insight as to what's going on inside when you hit this symbol, this register switch on your left side of your accordion, your bass machine. That's what it's called. Now, here's the same register, okay? But you're using the G diminished chord button with the C bass. Now here's what goes on inside. Your alto reed set gives you these chord tones, E4, G4, and B flat 4. See, that's what you're hearing. And then your bass button, when you add that C bass button, once again, you're getting a C4 from your alto reed set and a C3 from your tenor reed set. So you have a complete seventh chord. When you use this register, if your accordion has this symbol, mine doesn't, and you play these two buttons, chord button, bass button, you will get these tones. And you will have a complete C dominant seventh chord. Okay, I try to make that clear for the beginner because it's good to know. And once you memorize all this stuff, you never need to do it again. C dominant 7. A very basic chord that almost everybody uses, even beginners. Now, you can also substitute, if you want to, a G diminished, G bass, G diminished chord button. That's a G diminished combination, see? Instead of the C dominant 7. See, your C dominant 7 ordinarily resolves to F. But you can substitute that G diminished chord, G bass, G diminished button. Substitute that instead of your C dominant 7. Okay, you can use, in certain situations, a G bass with the G diminished chord button. Okay, so I took so long. That's the basics of the dominant 7th chord on the accordion, and that's a very essential chord that's used in many, many, many pieces of music. So thanks for being patient, and good night.